Well, where do you see the book I'm going to show you now? This is called Billy Bonkers and the Wacky World Cup. It actually has a warning on it that says it is guaranteed to split your sides laughing. So we have plenty of lovely cartoons in this as well. And I want to start at a chapter called Final Frenzy, which is when they discover that England have got into the World Cup final again. So you can imagine that feeling of euphoria when the country gets into the World Cup final. Yes, 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 screamed Mr. Bonkers, hurling his baseball cap into the sky. Woohoo, shouted Betty, jumping up and down. Billy leapt into the air with his arms raised up in a silent cheer. He'd lost his voice from shouting about 3/4 of the way through the match, but he didn't care. Nothing mattered except the amazing, stupendous, earth-shatteringly fantastic news that England were through to the World Cup final. The big square in the middle of Rio was packed with football fans. There were tall fans and short fans, skinny fans and plump fans. There were people from all sorts of different countries and homes, but they all had one thing in common: football. Together, they'd been watching the match on a huge open-air screen. Flags, football scarves and clackers were flying in all directions, and everyone seemed to want to hug everybody else. Nail-biting, Mr. Bonkers was bellowing, his sunglasses wonky due to a kiss from a rather excitable Brazilian lady. Never seen a semi-final like it. Incredible. They are gods. But are they good enough to beat France? Asked Betty. Billy bit his fingernails. This is, of course, a very unpleasant habit. As a matter of fact, Billy had never done it before, but the situation called for it. They have to, he croaked. Beat France? Mr. Bonkers shouted. He tried to run his fingers through the thin hair on the top of his head. Can England beat France? He repeated. Do ducks like the rain? Do bears poo in the woods? Does your mother make the best pork pies in the world? Of course they can beat France. He took a handkerchief from his pocket and mopped his brow. Isn't this amazing? Said Betty, looking round at the crowds that surrounded them. I've heard people speaking Spanish and German and Chinese and loads of other languages I don't even recognise. Mr. Bonkers stopped bouncing and suddenly looked very serious. He held up his hand with one finger raised. Billy and Betty looked at each other in dismay. They knew exactly what this meant. Mr. Bonkers was about to make a speech. Mr. Bonkers liked making speeches, but he hardly ever got the chance. Usually Mrs. Bonkers suddenly remembered something important she had to do in another room, while Billy and Betty made a dash for it. But now there was nowhere to run. They were surrounded by hordes of celebrating football fans. Don't need to speak the same language when you all love football, Mr. Bonkers proclaimed. One kick of the ball and you're best friends for life. Football, international language, builds friendships, keeps you fit. Billy and Betty had stopped listening. Betty was busy calculating the exact odds of England winning the World Cup. And Billy was desperately thinking of a way to get a ticket for the final. Now that England was through, he had to see the final no matter what, he just had to. Rio was full of football, and it made Billy's football fever even worse. Billy, Betty and Mr. Bonkers had spent every day since they'd arrived watching matches or repeats of matches on the big screens that had been set up around the city, while Mrs. Bonkers had gone sightseeing with her Hunk Spotter's Guide to Rio tucked under her arm. They had hardly been in the house except to sleep. Absent-mindedly, Billy pulled his 5th pork pie of the afternoon out of his bag and munched on it. He sat down on his bag and rubbed his legs. They were feeling a bit like cooked spaghetti after all the jumping up and down that he'd done. In just 2 days, England would play France in the World Cup final. There had to be some way that he could get to see that match. He just needed to have the time to think about it without interruptions. And that's how football could bring about world peace, concluded Mr. Bonkers. Well, I've got to go and find your mother. I promised her I'd meet her after the match to do some sightseeing. You do know your way back to the house, don't you? Billy and Betty nodded and waved goodbye as Mr. Bonkers elbowed his way through the crowd. Billy swallowed the last piece of his pork pie and took a long swig of water. That's better, he said in a hoarse whisper. It took them a long time to walk back to the house. There were parties on every street corner. An English family danced across the road. I'm just going to show you them dancing across the road there in the cartoon. A group of pretty German girls were dancing outside a cafe, and they grabbed Billy and Betty and made them dance too. The whole of Rio seemed to be celebrating, and the Bonkers family were celebrating with them. They were walking up the quiet, narrow street towards their house when Billy saw something that stopped him in his tracks. What is it? Asked Betty, sidestepping him. You look like your goldfish. It was true that Billy's mouth was hanging open, but there was a very good reason for that. Outside a small, dirty-looking shop, It was a large billboard. It was wobbling in the wind, and it looked as if somebody had written on it in thick red marker pen, "Extra final tickets available here." So does he get his ticket? You'll have to read it to find out. If you want some more information, the best thing to do is to check out your regional grassroots development officers in your area, and they can help your school access more information. But if you want to know more about it, go to the website at irishfa.com and go to the page Grassroots Football and Books. It's just on the left, really easy to navigate once you go onto the Irish FA website. This project is brought to you by the Irish FA Foundation in partnership with the Community Fund. It's fun, it's brilliant, and I've loved being involved in it. So at irishfa.com, go to the page Grassroots Football and Books, and you'll find more information out there.